Go. Okay, what's up, Josh? We are live, thought leaders, still talking about the channel. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How about yourself?
Oh man, life is good. Life is good. You and I have such compelling conversations offline, and then when we go live, it's like it's a new animal. So here we are. I
Here
got
we
my
are.
notes. Yeah, got some notes on some stuff to share with you.
Yeah. So, what were some of the topics from the last conversation you wanted to review?
Well, some pretty big topics, like let me see, trying to get us some better light here, but I forget about it. All right, just from the top, I got it labeled thought leaders on each page. Of course, AI, ML, MV, right? That's a big topic. Programming, there's some languages noted under there. AR, VR, Google Glass is noted there. Augmented reality. WebAssembly, it's a little too detailed. One of the areas I like a lot, which I don't know where we'll dig on that, but I could talk about it for hundreds of hours, is life extension, which ties into health, modern day health, even. Like life extension
Mhm.
doesn't have to be this crazy Frankenstein thing. It can just be like, hey, you're not going to get. Looks to me they're going to have a cure pretty soon for pick what's that what is that when you get when you start forgetting things as you get older.
Alzheimer's.
Obviously I'm getting it right because I can't remember. They're getting close
Let's
on some
okay. Let's focus on life extension.
right now because you don't want to hear any of the topics. Okay, let's talk about life extension. All right. I think I told you the other day that I share this with people in my life. Sometimes personally, I'm running into, I guess you could call them non-believers. I mean, not that it needs to be like a religion, but maybe they're not as scientific. These are usually people that have, not been computer scientists in their career. I don't know. But what do you want to talk about? We got CRISPR, bio, something, cryonics, and religion, even all under that. And there's probably more.
Let's start with Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's. Okay.
Alzheimer's. So, did you know that Stanford Memory Clinic? There's a memory clinic at the Stanford Research Hospital over in Palo Alto, and so it's at the heart of Silicon Valley. And in one of the things that came out of there was a research study paper. I'm not really sure how it came about, but they were researching Alzheimer's, obviously, because there's a lot of people that were getting, Alzheimer's, and so it's really difficult to deal with people because eventually the nature of the disease is you forget everything, and so then that makes the patient extremely hard to work with because if they need to modify their behavior, they can't remember to do it, or they forget who they are, they forget who you are. And so it takes so much time and energy to work with these people or these patients, that it's basically a death sentence, right, with that diagnostic. So one of the things that happened at GE Global Research, for example, was that they had an entire healthcare business, right? And so they had these CAT scanners, MRI machines, all these sort of stuff, right? And there we were tasked with the idea of like, how do we make these CAT scanners better, right? So then they would send guys like me to go to Stanford, UCSF, UC Berkeley, etc. Go talk to the doctors and go talk to the radiologists and friends and go like, hey, how are you using our CAT scanners? And then they would, say, oh, well, we have these 2,000 images, and they did it from head to toe. It creates these 2D images, and because they're doing slice by slice, right, as they're scanning the person. And then what happens towards the end is that the radiologist is looking at these CAT scans, and in this case, Alzheimer's, they're looking at holes in the brain, literally, and they're using imagery to try to understand Alzheimer's better. And they're seeing these giant gaping holes. And so we're like, can you help us with this? And we're like, don't throw any softballs at us, but okay, yeah, let's see what we can do about that. And so one of the things that we did was we stacked those 2,000 images up like paper. So now you have a 3D image, or what they call a voxel. a 3D pixel that allows us to look at this scan of the person in 3 dimension. And then you can even melt away the fat, and now you can look at people's brains inside and out, look at their heart murmur inside out, look at their pacemaker inside out, the whole body essentially. And then you can even use like morph targets to see if the holes get bigger or smaller over multiple scans. And so you're going like, oh, well, that's pretty interesting. So a lot of the 3D tech from movies and games is now starting to play into these 3D imaging systems that GE was producing. And these are multi-million-dollar electromagnets. But anyways, at the memory clinic in Stanford, they found a very interesting thing where they're going like, hey, did you know that if we had very bright, colorful, geometric games, like think Tetris, something that speeds up over time as you increase your response speed, the game speeds up, which forces you to try harder because your brain is a muscle, and if you exercise it, it gets stronger. So they started filling in the holes in the brain, literally, by playing Tetris for 15 to 20 minutes a day, just by flickering lights and a little controller, right?
Cool.
People are here. I'm gonna have to pause for a second.
No worries. Classic.
Yeah, here we go. Thought leaders, right? So anyways, with these scans or whatever. Hey, Loretta, are you guys still? Yeah. Hey, can you guys not be in the doorway, please? Thank you. So with these, with Tetris and stuff, then they're noticing that the brain is actually filling in the holes. And so then they're going like, oh, we need to build more memory games, things to help people with Alzheimer's and stuff. Then they also started saying stuff like, oh, well, what if we give it to children? Would that speed them up? Would it have a proactive effect in addition to a reactive effect, right? Meaning that, you're responding to damage or trauma through Alzheimer's. The other one you're talking about, oh, can we strengthen kids' minds, right? And make them more with video games? And the answer is like, yes, of course. And so there's a lot of really interesting stuff around Alzheimer's, around the memory clinic or memory in general and how that stuff works. And yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting stuff there.
Yeah, and that's cool. And just a personal note, my grandmother had dementia, and then she actually succumbed to full-blown, I think, then Alzheimer's, and that eventually one of her systems shut down when she passed. But I will say that she seemed happy. She kind of reverted to an earlier stage in her childhood where she liked to dance and play piano and look at flowers. It was a trip. Grandma was cool.
Yeah, there was a video. There's a video. I don't know if it was 60 Minutes or something, where they brought like music from the person's youth. Like, so say like this person was 60 or 70 or 90 or something, and they're succumbing to Alzheimer's and all that. They would bring music from that time period when their youth, and then all of a sudden their memory would start working. Without the video games and without all the exercising.
Yeah, correlation back to an earlier time.
It was kind of interesting.
That is interesting. So I think with the life extension topic, which is a very big one to mine, I love talking about, I think there's a subset that's just really important is the brain. Because, I've been to the conference, like the Alcor conference, and they brought people in from Oxford, from some guys from MIT, Stanford, a bunch of leading gerontologists and all kinds of people, all concerned about life extension, but primarily it's centered around the brain and preserving the brain. So I think that I saw something the other day, I think it was on Wired, and I pulled it up, and they're talking about scientists using light to help kind of thwart off and protect the brain using light imagery and with Alzheimer's patients. So it might be overhyped, but it's saying how light therapy could protect the brain with Alzheimer's. And then like a couple months back, I saw another breakthrough. And prior to that, I saw another breakthrough. and there's even some pills folks are working on that have been showing some efficacy. So it's an interesting topic because yeah, like first before life extension, it's really like, hey, a lot of times people who are, neophytes to it or Luddites, I don't know the right term, they automatically go to like, I don't want to live forever because they perceive themselves as being in their 99th year for 100 years, right? When really they can't perceive like regeneration,
Right.
which is a subset of life extension would be regenerative medicines, where it's like your body can actually repair itself, or you'd be
Yeah, all the stem
younger.
cells.
Yeah, or you'd be a younger you'd be a not you would like who was it? I think you were telling me somebody took their dad, their 90-something-year-old dad to Panama and did some sort of blood
Yeah, that was
work.
the Mel Gibson episode on Joe Rogan.
Right, okay.
So yeah, if you want to, I don't know, I guess we're not cool enough yet to get our OBS working with the browser.
No, that's cool. We can just talk.
But yeah, if you were to Google Joe Rogan, Mel Gibson, he'll tell you the whole story. And what I found interesting about that was that Mel Gibson's worth $750 million, right?
Yeah.
He can go anywhere he wants. He can fly anyone he wants to him if he wanted to, right? And when his dad was at the Mayo Clinic, they were saying, like, you guys need to really get your affairs in order and stuff because your dad's not doing very well at the age like 90 or 91-ish. And then Gibson is saying, someone told him, I think it was his brother, or maybe it was like one of the other doctors, like, there's this place in Panama where they just broke off from U.S. control, but they're very modern, like the U.S. in terms of their laws and in terms of their culture, and so they have some doctors down there that were working on stem cell therapies as a alternative to working inside the U.S. legal system, where they banned stem cells during the Bush years over the whole harvesting stem cells from like fetal tissue.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Bush talks about it in his book, Decision Points. He had some interesting things to say about it, but in some, Mel's like saying, hey, by the way, you can go to Panama. He took his dad down there. It seemed to work for him, not only because once you have the stem cells and you take an IV of these things, it works. It'll go start repairing things like your heart, your liver, your muscle, torn ligament, stuff like that, or at least that's what they're claiming. I'm not sure how true all this is. I actually called these guys to try to get an appointment or to try and like get some more information. Your internet connection is unstable.
Doesn't say that on this.
So, yeah, it's monitoring. So I actually talked to an orthopedic surgeon about my AC ligament. I was like, I have this old snowboarding accident. I'm fine, but it's torn. And they told me there's nothing to do about it. And most orthopedic surgeons say, hey, don't let anybody touch your shoulder if you're fine, because they'll do whatever for money. I'm going like, thanks. That's not scary. But anyways, I called these guys to see what they could tell me. And they ended up telling me, like, they said, well, we can't tell you anything legally, so we're not going to. But you can come visit us, and then we'll have a conversation then and there, which I didn't do. But the hope is now you can actually repair organs or even cartilage, like a lot of those NFL players that get the torn ACLs, for instance. Supposedly, some of them are claiming that they were able to rebuild their cartilage in their knee. You're going like, what? I thought that was impossible. And so with stuff like that, you're quickly going like, maybe there is something to this regenerative medicine thing. Maybe there is this thing called life extension and people could live past 100. So, the notion that the centurions, the people who live a century or more, are already alive. The people that are going to live 200 plus, the multi-centurions, are our kids, or probably you and I, or maybe our kids. And then the people that are going to go 400 or 500 plus are the next generation or two that has
before we just, without data, I think I'm going to be one who quotes what other people say, because I'm very much someone just watching this show, just like everybody else, like not our show, but the show of life. So, you know, we
Right.
got this thing about Google, people putting out information. But if you go and you look back at what Kurzweil says in one of his talks at TED Talks or whatever, he talks about this rate at which life expectancy is being pushed down to the days. And he said something about like and I'm just going to make up stuff here, because something to the effect of within 15 years, every day that you age, the life expectancy clock will go one day also. So you'll eventually meet a peak where the people alive today, their life expectancies will become even day for day. But then that will continue to increase. So to the point about the people who are going to live, our children, to be to 200, once you reach that precipice or that arc, and that's probably in 35 years, it's just going to always be this extending number. It's like a triangle moving past. It's like, as long as they keep having therapies where they can do molecular generation, bioreactors get better, nanotech gets better, AI gets stronger, backups get faster, you know, all of that. So it's just kind of like it's postulation, right? But supposedly by 20, and then of course, not to bring up the singularity, I don't even have it written here, but that's a Kurzweilian thing where he's like, soon we'll have this big brother thing that is smarter than all the minds that ever lived ever, and we could use it, maybe, hopefully, to solve things. So,
respectfully, I disagree with Kurzweil that AI is somehow going to be smarter than humanity, but I get his point. I totally.
He was talking about raw brain power.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
engines, like engines in cars. He says and like a human, like he puts out the I don't know how fast a human mind works in gigahertz, but it's got a benchmark. And he's talking, and they're talking about in a very short period of time, you and I will be able to go to like a platform and buy something as strong as a human mind for about $1,000 a month. You know, like the computer, right? So like, I think that's what he meant by there'll come a point of the singularity thing where that mind will be whatever its goals are. We don't know. That's the philosophical stuff they argue about that keeps Elon Musk up at night, worried. You know, if we don't make it right, if someone else makes it the wrong way, it could just end up stepping on us on accident. You know, because it just doesn't care.
I mean, there's tons of sci-fi movies that like dive into the utopian versus the dystopian view of things. Like for one, Terminators, on the other end, Star Trek, right, with Data, Commander Data, that sort of thing. In the middle, somewhere is Star Wars, where it's a very messy Clone War thing. Some of the more recent sci-fi movies. What was the one with Johnny Depp where they cloned his mind?
Transcendence, yeah.
Transcendence, that's one. Another one was Her, where you know people will relate to their AI more than they relate to themselves, to other people. Or there's the Matt Damon one with Elysium, where rich people will be up in some spaceship and everything's going to be perfect, and they're hoarding all the technology, and all the poor people on the planet, you know, fighting over the scraps, but they're super teched out. So there's every variation of that, and I love the sci-fi, exploring these ideas through sci-fi, because A, it's fun, you dramatize the whole thing, but then B, it goes back to the notion of like Homer's Odyssey, or a lot of the Greek classics, or even religion, where you're kind of going like, well, what is the point of all this? Is there a spirit to this that is directing things in one particular direction, or is this just man-made, and who knows, right?
I mean,
those are big questions.
Those are big questions, yeah, and they're subjective answers, and you know, why do butterflies exist, right? Like, why do I exist? You know, like when you get philosophical about the fact that I expel carbon dioxide, or that I naturally produce trash as a human being in our society, I mean, what benchmark am I really going to add to a certain perspective of nature and say, well, he was just so integral to the future of whatever future? Like, there's entire universes eating each other up out there. So it's like, it's hard to put a happy or sad story against it, but truly our past with technological evolution has shown a lot of gnashing of the teeth. There has been showing that technology gets used in bad ways against the have-nots. So it's not hard to imagine that a lot of this new tech there will be some losers for sure, you know. So that's dystopian or not,
but
yeah,
but
it's
like someone else was, yeah. But like, somebody else was making, I forget who it was. It wasn't Kurzweil, but it was somebody like Kurzweil was making a point, and he was saying, hey, the poorest among us have flat screen TVs and mad Xboxes, right? In America, anyways. And then as we lift all of humanity out of poverty with technology, and not even necessarily capitalism or democracy or those old, hard and true kind of methods, but with technology, just as we make everything super cheap, what used to be considered magic is now going to be available to everyone. If so, like even like in Elon Musk, when he was talking about Tesla's, well, cars for the masses or electric cars for the masses, which harkens back to like Germany and stuff. But basically, what he was saying was, hey, we're going to make really expensive sports cars that are faster than supercars today, and they're going to pay for the development to make it cheap to make a mass production car that's only 30 grand that your average Joe can afford. So we're going to use the wealthy's money to make it to spread technology to everyone. And so you're like, wow, that's brilliant. Like
yeah, I mean, he's a
that's
forward
hope and change
thinker.
you can believe in, right?
Well, I think, yeah, and I have this
Yeah.
conversation with you where I was like, the problem I keep running into is it's like methods, right? If you call a method in a programming language today a high-level programming language, a lot of stuff is going on below the scenes, right? But it's logical at least. We can know that with certain inputs, we're going to get certain outputs. The same can be said for our language. So when I talk to a friend of mine who maybe sold a restaurant and down at the beach, but never has been in computer science, though he's an avid user of computers and watches all the sci-fi movies. But if you ask him to understand what life extension is, he's going to be very pessimistic and say, that'll never come to pass. Meanwhile, he's taking a call from China in real time, right? So it's just, I think human beings are just so good at, like, I told him this analogy. I said, I'm watching a show on Netflix where guys have taken data, DNA information out of a glowing, not a starfish, but a jellyfish that has phosphorescence, and they've now encoded it into rats. And they have these little glow-in-the-dark rats. And I said, there won't be this moment where a rat goes running across. And I told him, I said, there won't be this moment for you, man, when a rat goes running across the highway that's glowing that you go, oh, aha, we are going to live forever. I'm like, there's just so many different things competing that are just pretty profound to me. I said, the miracle, yeah.
Go.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I remember making the argument that there is nobody who had the computational number of why we exist. And then I log onto a TED Talk like last year, and the lady put the number in like 17 trillion to 1 that you're here. And I didn't check her numbers, but someone's been like, things are evolving and concepts of like what a miracle it is that you and I are alive right now, and that I could be sitting in my friend's car and say, hey, there's a good chance you might live to be 500. And he's like, I just don't like focus on those kinds of things. And so what I'm saying to you is that as a person in business, I'm trying to remind myself that I'm not yet ready for the garbage heap, that like maybe we'll beat Alzheimer's, maybe I'll live longer. And those, much like the finance companies I've worked for who do 100 years investments, I wanted to shift my own thinking. I don't care if the guy believes me or not, because he's going to be a consumer when it's $99.95 a month. He's going to sign up for it later on anyways. What I'm trying to do is predict the future.
Race to the bottom.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, just economies of scale, things get built out, they get cheaper and more understood and widely adopted or whatever. But yeah.
Go ahead.
Well,
one.
You go ahead.
So one of the words of wisdom that came out of the 20th century was antitrust, right? With monopoly practices, where we're going like, well, okay, big businesses obviously want a monopoly. They don't want. Peter Thiel said, don't go into the restaurant business unless you want to work your ass off and make almost, very thin margins or 9 times out of 10 go out of business, right? What you want is something that you can control and monopolize, make as much money as you possibly can until the government catches up and says, okay, we're going to break you up and we're going to create some competition here, right? Apple versus Microsoft back in the day, right? Microsoft had to revive Apple because they needed Apple to be around for a duopoly at least, so that there's some competition. And that's how they were able to revive Apple. And look at now, they're both trillion-dollar companies, and all our tech is better, right? Because they forced them to compete. So like the race to the bottom is both frustrating, but it's also by design. Like we're doing it on purpose to force technology to move forward rather than stagnate Pac-Bell style back in the 60s.
Oh yeah, man, you're right. And so like the race to the bottom is a human term that can mean a lot of things, but when we're talking about nature and like the way nature has evolved over time, which is a man defined the concept of time, right? Like we made it so that we could know when to plant crops, when to go to work, when to go to bed, when to meet at certain places. Yeah, or exactly. So it's a mapping mechanism, and it exists, but it's a human-made construct. So I guess with technology, the easiest I've dealt with very complex things is looking at it like nature. It is a derivative of inhabitants who made this darn thing, the web. And so the more that you look at it as an output of also of nature, the more you can understand that maybe it would be a race to the bottom, quote unquote, but what comes after the bottom? More recursion, more development, certainly a flattening where, like you said, everybody has technology in their house nowadays. Even the poor countries that I go and visit where I do nonprofit stuff, they've all got satellite dishes on their roof and internet, and no windows. Yeah. And no floor, but they got internet, which means they have information, they have access to information.
That's what Elysium was trying to illustrate, was that while America is that shiny hill on the shiny city on the hill, the rest of the world is still catching up. In my mind, turns into time warps actually, where if I leave San Francisco for go to Reno or Nevada or Las Vegas. Well, Las Vegas is different, but I feel like I just walked back.
Oh, I get you.
Years.
Well, the
if
same.
I go to
Well, the same in corporate environments. They get entrenched in a certain technology that was hot at a certain decade. They build a big thing, and they can't just unbuild it. They're using it for business. So you go to work for them as a consultant or a contractor, and you are going back in time. You'll be looking up old code and you'll check in the web, and you're like, I found a solution for IE6. Why are you still running IE6? They're like, we got legal requirements that we're using Windows, whatever, XP still. And you're just like back in time. You're back in time.
Even like ATMs, for example, like a lot of the cybersecurity stuff is pointing out that, hey, like technology that came around in Windows 2000, right, is used in a lot of ATMs. And so all the hacks that worked on Windows, guess what, works on the ATM. So now you can just make the ATM spit out money remotely just by hacking DOS or hacking, the backbone of Windows, or go do registry hacks and stuff like that. And so you're going like, I forgot about all those, but here's a treasure trove of them. And you're like, well, okay, let's not be a criminal here. But at the same time, you have to realize that this technology is vulnerable, and now corporate America can't afford a time warp. They just can't afford it anymore. They're like, yeah, we're going to have to tighten this up real quick, fast, and in a hurry, or else, just like Y2K, right? Same deal. Where like at the turn of the millennia, everyone was worried about the fact that all the dates were 2-digit numbers instead of 4-digit numbers. Instead of it being 1972, it started in 72. And so as we went from 1999 to 2000 or 2001, all those 2-digit numbers will confuse the F out of everything. So they thought the whole world was going to blow up somehow.
Well, they had plenty of consultants, and I worked with one who sat there, and his job was just to look through code. And I don't recall there being anything in the news where anybody had an issue, but it was definitely so the topic of life extension is a big one, right? Like
huge.
Like I'm not afraid to admit online to people that I signed up for cryonics, and I'm probably the only person I know outside of those people, other members that I've met at 2 different conferences, that would do something like that. That everybody else I've met They say either A, I don't want to live forever, which is it's a statement in the now. But I always tell them, if an angel came to you and said you have 5 more minutes to live, and I can give you 5 more minutes when it's up, you'd be surprised what you say when 5 more minutes is up. You'll say, yes, I'll take 5 more minutes, and you'll keep going. Now they'll say, well, I don't want to. That's just my argument. It's not a great one, but it's like if you
I've
have,
had this discussion many times.
yeah, like you can make decisions today that sound cavalier, like, oh, I don't want to live forever. But if the technology is good enough in the next 10 or 20 years, and you start noticing that everyone around you is starting to take medicines that are making them a little younger, skin a little tighter, heart a little healthier, you're on it, man. And also, next thing you know, they're like, hey, you don't have to, you could have another 25 years if you start doing these types of therapies. And that's when I think people start saying, yeah, I'm taking on life extension incrementally. I don't.
Yeah, but so like my experience was that I remember a buddy of mine that we played football with. He was saying to me, "Oh," and I was telling him about all this stuff, right? And it went right over his head, right? And then I was trying to like convey to him, it's like it's not as far fetched as it sounds. I'm not saying forever. I mean, never say ever, never say forever, right? But what you can say is longer, right? It's going to increase. I have aunts and uncles who literally live to 102, right? A lot of them. So, oh, sorry, people are pressing through again. Hey, Loretta, I'm on the stream. Can you guys? I'm still recording. Can you go in the other room, please? Thank you. Sorry.
Well, let's make a division here of two things. One is the ability of the current human being model. Every human being on the face of the earth has a natural ability to live this long, and it's going to be based on food, lifestyle, where they're located, some genetics, pre-encoded, right? No modifications. This concept of life extension, the ones that I'm talking about are invasive to a degree. It's modifying genomes, it's inducting changes, it's regenerating organs, and it's just a whole lot of a host. It's nanotech, down the road of these little nanites inside your bloodstream repairing damaged cells. It's a bunch of crazy talk, but it's not natural. It's natural, to a degree because natural people are evolving it, like naturally born people. But like if you look at the two twins that were just modified in China 2 years ago, they broke the evolutionary link. They modified living humans, and they're supposedly going to be smarter and not be able to catch AIDS. And any child that they have, they don't have a direct, they are now a new type of human. So that is weird,
Well, for me, it goes back to the Bible, right? Where they talk about in the beginning, so-and-so that begat so-and-so, who begat so-and-so, who begat so. Anyways, they were saying like, I forget, I'm blanking on the name, but the original guy was 800 years old, right? And the kids lived to be 400 to 600 years old or something like that. And all the way to something in Abel. I'm blanking on the names. But back to my aunt who was 102, she was sharp and with it the entire time she was on her farm, 300 acres of peanuts in Texas. And so it wasn't until she left the farm and went into the nursing homes for assistance that she went downhill, right? And they were doing all types of things, like everything from dialysis. So then every time she got dialysis, she'd perk right back up because her hormones are back in balance for a moment. But what's creating the aging is the failing of the organs that regulate your blood and keep the hormones in balance. So if your heart's not pumping properly, yeah, you're going to age faster. If you're taking on too much stress and you're overwhelmed, you're going to age faster because you're going to burn out more cells. If your liver and kidney is stressed too much and it can't keep up and keep you in homeostasis, then you're going to incur damage because you're not producing enough stem cells to keep up with the damaged cells. So if you supplement it with stem cells, provided you don't have a freak out, I've heard some freakouts that are kind of scary. Like some guy took stem cells and then hair follicles started growing in his throat, his esophagus.
No, come on.
He was choking on hair, right?
Okay. Well,
I've heard another guy grow an ear on his back or something crazy. But so obviously I'm not an early adopter, by the way. You need to, bro, don't be such an early adopter, bro.
I hadn't heard none of those. I've heard about the rat where they grew a human hair on the ear on the back of that. But
Yeah, there's all kinds of funky stuff there. But the point is as they hone those technologies and those techniques, right, and they use your own DNA so that there's not rejection. They're even 3D printing these the kidneys and the livers, and then they're
yeah,
slathering it with your own DNA.
very complex organs. Yeah. Yep.
And there's a TED talk on it of a guy showing a 3D printed kidney, and then they take some of your stem cells, they slather it with your own stem cells so that it doesn't have organ rejection, and then they installed it in a kid, right?
Right. Right.
And saved his life or something. GE had a similar one called Fighting Fire with Fire. So if you Google GE Fighting Fire with Fire, the video will come up about curing cancer. And so in this video, they talk about this little girl with leukemia, and she's dying, right? And they selected her because she's dying. Like, she had no other options, no treatments were working, radiation wasn't working, chemo wasn't working, nothing worked. So it was this or nothing, right? So they chose to go with it. And what they said was that they reprogrammed HIV, which is a virus, because the virus can go into cells and turn on and off DNA, and so does RNA do that. But
it can also attack
viruses
cancers.
can like
Yeah.
short.
It can attack cancers. Yeah, they use a version of the herpes virus a lot too, for like attacking brain cancer. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so they're saying that HIV, which, you know, took down Magic Johnson back in the 80s, well, he's still alive, but he had HIV, right? And he popularized it and made everyone aware of this thing. But they took HIV because it was the most aggressive. And they reprogrammed it with CRISPR to eat cancer for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And supposedly it saved this little girl's life. Now they have to go through the clinical trials. They did that in 2014, so it's 2020 now. So I didn't keep up on where this thing went, but I do know that they're trying. And when you now you have to be super scared about, I mean, on one hand, that's super, you're like, oh my God, wow, you can cure cancer with HIV, except now you have HIV, the most aggressive virus out there, and you're going to go start dosing people with this. Like, you might actually create the Walking Dead, like on accident, if you're not careful with this kind of thing. One mutation will put it down the wrong path real quick, fast, and in a hurry. And it'll turn into, what was the Tom Hanks movie, something Philadelphia, with Denzel? Anyway.
I think it was Philadelphia.
So as he's,
I think that was the name. Yeah, I think that's just the name.
Yeah, and towards the end, the people with HIV, as they're not rotting away, but as they're degrading, their bodies getting degraded, they start looking like zombies or walking skeletons. And so that's why I have to caution people. I'm like, as exciting as this is, we don't actually know what a mutation would do or how it would affect everyone. And if you couple that with the GMOs, the genetically modified organisms, where they're taking jellyfish DNA and putting it in tomatoes, and then so that the tomato is more spongy or more squishy, like a jellyfish, and more elastic, and you could stack them up higher and drive it in a farther distance from the farm to the store, then all of a sudden these kids will eat this salsa or this tomato, or have a ham sandwich with the BLT with the tomato on it or something, and they might actually have a shellfish allergy. Or maybe you start lacing peanuts with the stuff, and now you call it a peanut allergy, but really it's a shellfish allergy. We don't know.
Yeah,
if these things aren't properly labeled, we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. It's not hard to sit there and talk about the not outliers, but the risks of evolving technology. So, it 20 years ago, they were talking about using the HSV, the herpes-simplex virus, modified to go after brain cancers because it's known as a voracious virus. It replicates really fast, much like an HIV. But these are truly, especially when we switch from taking something that's in nature, whether it be a virus or not, and using it as a different vehicle, versus when you brought up CRISPR, genetic engineering is actually a recipe change. So you couldn't really call it I wouldn't call it the HIV virus. Now, you're right, you can make Walking Dead, but you could also argue philosophically that if you have the code to make the Walking Dead, someone could design the code to cure the Walking Dead. So it does come. So that's, you know, that's going to always be the yin and yang.
The pendulum is swinging. It just goes
Right.
back and forth. And,
Yeah.
You have to take the good with the bad, right? Take it with a grain of salt.
But be
Just
conservative.
understand
Yeah. To be careful, because you're right.
that, yeah,
You know, because look at
That's
what they did in the 80s. I think it was with
Right.
with putting a baboon heart in a baby that was born with her heart out. I think it was outside of her body or something, and she needed a heart transplant. And they're like, let's try the baboon's heart, and she lived for all of a day or two. Fast forward to now, when someone has a heart attack, they take a little, you know, what is it, arthroscopic or something like that, and they go in and they can actually clear the blockage. And so the technology has shifted a lot in a few decades. So, you know, I don't know. Is that life extension? Swapping someone's heart, fixing it? I think it is, you know?
Somebody made the point, like, you know, the way that you get a truck to 1,000,000 miles is not by making a better truck. It's by swapping out all the parts. And so, but what needs to remain intact is the mind. And so, to go back to the Bible, to bring up the religious points again, is that what is God? What is the universe? What is the point of all this? Like, what is information? Like, some physicists want to say the universe is information, right? And black holes destroy information somehow by sucking everything in and tearing it apart. But what if, like, in order for any of this life extension stuff to work, you need to keep the mind intact, right? So then Transcendent was talking about, well, what if we can clone your mind and put it into a robot or a computer somewhere? What was that other one with the robot that cloned people's minds and then they had droid bodies?
There's tons of them. 6 Days with Schwarzenegger.
Like
yeah, they had.
It was about a robot. It was like Rugby or Ruggy or something like that.
Okay. I
forget what it's called. But anyways, so then you have to ask yourself, what is the nature of God, right? What is the nature of man? What is a spirit, right? And that always goes back to the first law of thermodynamics for me, right? Where it's like energy can either be created or destroyed. You know, things don't break down, they don't break up, they break down. Or sorry, they don't break down, they break up, meaning that as the system gets more and more heat or too much energy, they break into different things, but the energy's still doing its thing, changing form from one thing to the other. So that gets very Darwinian, where things start to evolve from one thing to another. And there's another good saying that, like, things have a way of going to the place that they stay the longest, right? So, which is referring to gravity. And we don't even know what gravity is exactly. We just know its effect on things. And so the reason why I'm bringing this back to the Bible is, like, what if, you know, the mind or the knowledge or the information that compresses into something called wisdom or insights, or that we're then using to make AI with, for example, in the form of algorithms or whatever, then what is that? Is that a spirit? Is that a robot? What are we? Are we robots if we could just program our DNA? Or are we filled with this thing called energy, and it's always existed? It was just changing forms from light to heat to calories or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, I like to leave all this open-ended and think about it. Hence the topic of the show, thought leaders.
Well, look, man, I mean, if you can remember back when you were a kid and you had your first philosophical thought about why something was something, it was the language that you were taught to perceive that with an audible word, right? So are we robots? Yes and no. It's just the words. You know, are we energy? Yes and no. Are we spirit? Well, yes and no. It's very subjective to our language. And even if you can prove all of this out in math is a construct that man has derived to have understanding of what it perceives through its systems, its own senses. So what is truth? It's a word that we put into our dialect to define something. So that's why when people say, oh, Nick Bogstrom says that we might be a simulation. So what does that mean when I say something is a simulation? I mean, Is it still nature? Was there still a God? I mean, again, we are bound by our dialect.
Hey, in the book of
defining.
Genesis, it said in the beginning there was the Word, God's Word, right? That's
Well,
what started everything.
profound. That's profound. Yeah, that's
Right?
crazy. I like it, man. So, so look, we hit a lot of good topics, and there is a kid I wanted to meet up with to talk to in a bit about a job working for one of my companies. But I do want to just kind of go over that. I took some notes, and it's good to go back to them because we really hit them all. We talked about a little bit about singularity. We didn't bring up Kurzweil, who when I check in on him, he's now talking about computronium and become encoded into a rock and set off into space and living forever. And it's like, wow, I hadn't caught on that one yet. And then life extension.
That's an Einstein idea, though.
Is it? Idea. Yeah. So
he wanted to put sperm and bacteria on an asteroid and shove it through a black hole and to impregnate a planet on the other side with life.
I don't know. And then we talked a bit about CRISPR, that though I'm probably more knowledgeable, and you are too, than someone we meet on the bus who never been in tech like we have been. It's still an area that I would like to know more about. Yeah. And then, and I talk about cryonics, and I always give everything a 1% chance, but in a way it's almost a 50-50, because in math or in logic, conditional logic, like even in Boolean logic, the very existence of the if construct, you just need enough time until the condition is met and it will return true. So that's interesting to me. That's why cryonics, though I may not need it in the future, it's still kind of an insurance plan for me to make a short leap, in my opinion. So, but the science is there. There's some scientific efficacy to it. And then you did bring up religion. We talked a bit about that, which is interesting because a lot of physicists nowadays, you read, I don't want to generalize, but they say that a lot of them start out as atheists, or they're just very much realists and numbers folks. And then after a long period of time in their field, they eventually discover such complexity, they believe in a creator, whether it be a god or whatnot. So that's interesting.
A Google executive started the Church of AI, where AI is going to be his god, and he wants AI to think that he had a hand in helping birth it and to be nice to him in the future.
Well, I mean, gosh, you hear the guys talking about that. And so then you hear about these other things in entropy, and they're like, or a time and space, and they're like, maybe time is actually marching backwards. And then you kind of wonder to yourself, what? And I went and I looked up the theories behind it, and it's like, I can't say it can be refuted, but some people put up the math, and so maybe the AI already exists as a god, and it's devolving, but we see it as time going forward. It's crazy talk, but it's usually like from very smart people who spend a lot of time thinking. So you're like, wow.
Well, that video I did on simulation theory, right, where briefly you can view the video if you want.
Where is it?
It's on my website. It's down right now, but it'll be back up in another day or something.
Okay.
But anyways, it's on YouTube too, so, and Facebook.
All right.
On my page, if you care to look. But in it, I was trying to make the point. Everyone keeps talking about, well, it's like the Matrix, man. And you're like, okay, well, the Matrix was just a variation of Alice in Wonderland, which was written in like the 15th or 16th century when the Gutenberg printing press first was created. So they were trying to just say, what are these things called dreams? Well, that seems, I could have swore I was talking to real people in my dream, but they're just figments of my imagination. Are they a simulation, right? Are we am I a figment of Chad's imagination? Is Chad a figment of my imagination? I don't know. Maybe we're telepathically meeting somewhere over this thing called Zoom or Facebook. What?
It is crazy. Yeah. I mean, like, imagine telling somebody 1,000 years back that we're talking, I could see him in my room, right? And I could talk to him, but I know he was alive. He was hundreds of miles away. They wouldn't know how to put it into context. They would think it was magic. It would sound crazy. Right? It's like, I don't believe you. And here we are doing it like it's nothing. Yeah.
So what I was saying in the simulation theory, and this is something I haven't heard anyone bring up except for me. So this is the result of Josh working on a physics engine for Electronic Arts on the Xbox to make The Godfather. This is where this came from, was the notion of like, what if these because I'm now playing God by making a simulation called The Godfather. right? It's a video game based off of the movie, based off of gangsters in New Jersey, the whole thing. And in it, I was going like, oh, wow, I keep melting all these Xboxes because I didn't close this loop properly, or I didn't optimize this algorithm for this frame rate or whatever. And so then the Xbox would catch on fire because the real physics was using too much electricity, right? And so then I'm like looking at it, I'm going like, well, what if one of these characters in the program, I program them to go rev up the Xbox on purpose, right? To catch it on fire on purpose. And then they're like, don't do that, Josh. We're trying to make money here. And I'm like, yeah, but it's a good idea. But what if AI gets smart enough to realize that, hey, it becomes conscious, becomes sentient, and realize that it could affect the real world from the inside out? And then what if it makes its own simulation, right? Like Russian dolls, it just, and then deep down at the very bottom of whatever Russian doll this AI makes is a demon. And it's designed to do bad things. And it goes back up the channel to the top, to the root, right? Back to the flash days. You just reach out of the movie clip. That's a movie clip of a movie clip of a movie clip. Reach up to the root thing, and you can start messing with your own self, right? From the top down, just by reaching out to the root and going back down. And so what if the demon, or on a MacBook, FYI, the OS is called Darwin, right? Because it's Unix. It's a dirty joke. But they also use daemons to run programs in the background that you don't know about.
It's
like
Damon, but I get where you're going with it. It's right.
But that was the pun. It's a pun as far as
I understand.
As far as I'm concerned. But what if one of these demons or daemons or whatever you want to call them, AI creates, and it has bad malicious intent, or maybe it has more like an angel where it has good intent, does good things and provides good services, which it does too, comes to base reality and start over revving your car engine, start over revving your power grid or transformer or things of these nature. And you're going like, ooh, what if there's an intelligence there that's some intelligence that came from you and I, the programmers that made this thing, some algorithm or whatever, or some energy or some intent from me got translated into AI, and then AI does its thing and throws it back out, right? So what is that? Is that a spirit? Is that energy? Is that an algorithm? Is that just a stupid joke?
Well, look, we're only going to be, okay, I'm glad we brought up these topics, but like my statement is, there's a class of ants in the world here that is considered the smartest ants in the world. And they actually do a bit of farming. They keep some aphids around for the cold winter times. They build caverns, and they have duties, right? And they're pretty smart. They have a language. But when they perceive us, in their language, they have to define what is it when they see some guy walking by on his cell phone. Is it a god? He's powerful. He could smite us. It's red. It's green. Whatever their language is. So when we start to talk about things that are an individual, even in today's day and time, you go look at the most advanced building we have in New York City, you probably, I don't know, maybe the best architect in the world may not know every single, not even molecule, but every single piece that made the entire building. He may not understand Ethernet to a great detail, or how the internal networks work, or maybe the heating system, though he may know the names of it. So it took a collective consciousness to create something so erect and so amazing. So when we talk about this AI or these narrow or AGIs that can do just things that we can't perceive, that's happening right now with YouTube. According to the YouTube developers, they give the AI that does prediction and recommendation engine goals, but they really don't understand the internals of how it's coming up with it, according to them. So maybe there's a little bit of truth, maybe a little bit of false. So I don't know, man. I mean, heck, I don't even know what I'm doing half the time, and I'm the guy running my own show. Let's just hope for the best outcome, and it's a good philosophical question you got there. The guy I'm meeting at 6, he's running a little late. So, I mean, I don't know. He said he's going to be 6:20. And I'd rather talk for hours. I almost want to cancel him. But
if you want, we can reconvene again soon.
Yeah, man. I'd love to. Dude, we could hit these topics. Yeah, these topics.
Yeah, we can.
You coupled with like maybe some Googling and eventually you're going to get some cool stuff. Because look, bro, there was a time when I Googled this stuff pretty intensely, and I found like a teacher, you know, who had been studying this stuff, and he gave an hour dissertation on YouTube about why AI wouldn't harm us. And like, I cannot find that video to save my life. But it was the one time someone had a really comprehensive explanation as to why there would be symbiosis with the AI. And we see so many of these antitheses where it's like, it's going to destroy us. It's going to be gray goo. It's going to eat us up. And anyways.
Well, I have to use a lot of self-reflection and look at what my intention was as a 20-year-old was, and how even alcohol can change my intentions, right?
The drunk AI.
Greatly. And they always say alcohol is a spirit.
Sure.
Or I could always tell when I was drunk writing code, the next day I'm like, oh, I was a little drunk there, Josh. You're getting a little ranty.
Yeah.
Versus like when I'm like dead sober, I want to get out of there so bad that I just like, okay, I need this dead stupid simple. It needs to be as few words as possible. It needs to be like haiku. It needs to just done, right? And so even like what I'm eating or not eating, whether I'm working out or not working out, whether I'm driving throws a lot of adrenaline. It's like the Tetris thing I was talking about earlier, where it's very colorful, it's fast. This car can go like 120 easily. I have to regulate my emotions so I don't hit the gas pedal too hard. And if I was drinking too hard the day before, guess what? I'm speeding. So what I'm getting at is that these things affect, these are like almost external spirits that take over your body to a degree and start revving your engine too hard. And then that changes the output of what you're producing. And so then in terms of code, or the people that are writing the algorithms, they might be under the influence of Adderall. They might be under the influence of Coke or speed or alcohol or a poor diet of sugar,
stress,
whatever.
Stress, cortisol.
And so who knows what all the influences are and what the total sum of that is. But like I was saying earlier, energy is always changing form. And we see how chemically the chemical energy affects us in our output. And so, which then turns into a flaming Xbox in some instances.
You keep talking about burning down the Xbox. Things. I'm glad you didn't say PlayStation, because I'm an Xbox fan. So with that, let's revisit these topics. Let's revisit these topics a few times, man. And we'll learn. And we're just, touching on some cool stuff. So it's been a good time, dude. Yeah. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up. I'll talk to you real soon, dude. Peace. All right, bud. Talk to you soon. That was a good one.